The prairie wind carried the smell of dust and iron that morning, whispering through the tall grass like a warning from the old spirits. Ravens circled above the canyon rim, their shadows gliding over the red stone cliffs. The land was quiet, yet beneath that quiet lay a tension. It's the kind that presses on a man's chest and keeps his hand close to his weapon. It was here, on the edge of the wild, that a Comanche hunter stopped in his tracks. His horse shivered beneath him as if sensing something unseen. The hunter dismounted, scanning the ground, following tracks pressed deep into the soil. They were not just animal tracks. There was a struggle written in the dirt. Broken branches, blood darkening the sand, and then the massive form of a fallen bear. The bear was enormous, its fur tangled with dust and blood, its body still warm from the fight. Its death carried the weight of violence. But it was not the bear that stole the hunter's breath. It was what he found beneath it. Pressed under the beast's heavy frame, half hidden by its bulk, was a young woman. Her skin was pale against the earth, her dress torn and smeared with dirt. Her eyes were shut, yet her chest rose with shallow breaths. She had no weapon, no companion, no horse. The hunter's heart tightened. This was no accident. No soul survived being trapped under such a creature unless the spirits themselves willed it. He knelt beside her, sliding his axe from his belt to pry the bear aside. The weight fought him, but his arms were steady, honed by years of hunting buffalo and fighting enemies who dared cross his people. When the body shifted enough, he dragged her free, careful not to cause more harm. Her face, though streaked with blood and dust, was young, maybe no more than 20 summers. She stirred faintly, whispering something he could not understand. A language not his own, broken like the rattle of leaves in the wind. The hunter's gaze swept the canyon floor. This was no safe place. Whoever had left her here might still be close. He lifted her into his arms, her weight light against his chest, and listened. The land gave no answer, only the wind curling through the rocks and the faint caw of ravens circling higher now, patient for their feast. He carried her toward his horse, knowing shelter must come before questions, as he rode with her cradled against him. Her breath shallow, but steady, he thought of the stories told by the old ones around the fire. Stories of strangers who stumbled into their lands, carrying both curses and blessings. Some were messengers of sorrow, bringing soldiers and blood. Others were threads of fate that tied two worlds together. He did not yet know which she was, only that her life now rested in his hands. And the way her body trembled, even in unconsciousness, told him she carried pain deeper than wounds. By the time the sun lowered toward the canyon walls, he had reached a hidden hollow by the river, a place where his people often camped during hunts. He laid her upon a blanket of hides and fetched water to wash the dirt from her face. Her eyelids fluttered, and for the first time her eyes opened. They were wide, clouded with fear, yet they fixed on him as though clinging to the one figure that stood between her and the dark. She tried to speak again, her voice hoarse, her words foreign, but pain stopped her. He silenced her gently, pressing water to her lips. Through her broken breaths, fragments of truth began to reveal themselves. Arrayed, fire, men whose faces she could barely name, shadows with rifles and blades. She had run until the earth itself seemed to swallow her, until the bear rose before her in the wilderness. Whether the beast had struck her or shielded her, even she did not know. But the terror in her eyes was clear. Those who had done this were still out there. The hunter listened, his jaw tightening as she shivered under the weight of her memories. In his heart, something old stirred. His people knew the taste of loss. They knew the sting of blood spilled by hands that showed no mercy. This woman, though not of his tribe, bore the same wounds of cruelty. And in that recognition, he felt the rising of a vow he did not speak aloud. Her pain would not go unanswered. Night fell over the canyon, painting the cliffs in shadow. The hunter fed the fire, its glow reflecting in his dark eyes as he kept watch. The woman slept fitfully, her body shaking at unseen dreams, her hand clutching the hide as if it could anchor her to safety. He sharpened his blade in silence, each stroke of stone against metal carrying the promise of what was to come. He knew the land well. He knew how to follow tracks, how to strike unseen, how to let vengeance move with the swiftness of the hawk and the weight of the bear. But he also knew this was no simple task. Whoever had left her for dead would not be careless men. They carried fire and iron, weapons that cut down warriors from a distance. He would need more than strength. He would need the patience of the wolf and the cunning of the fox. When the first light of dawn crept into the hollow, she opened her eyes again. There was fear still, but also something else, a spark of trust. She did not know his name, nor he hers. Yet in that silence between them, an understanding grew. She had been given shelter, and though she could not yet speak it, she knew that the man who had pulled her from beneath the bear was not one who would abandon her. Still, danger moved in the distance. He could feel it in the air, in the way the ravens had lingered longer than they should, as though waiting for death to follow. He rose, tightened the grip on his axe, stepped to the edge of the hollow to study the horizon. Somewhere out there, men rode with the memory of fire still clinging to their hands. Somewhere out there, the blood that stained the earth was not yet dry, and somewhere vengeance waited to be claimed. The Comanche hunter breathed deeply as the morning air sharpened his lungs and turned back to the hollow where she lay. He did not yet know the full weight of her story, but he knew enough. Her pain was his now, and those who had given it to her would soon learn that the land remembers every drop of blood spilled. Upon it, he tightened the strap on his weapon, his shadow stretching long across the canyon floor as the sun climbed higher. The day had begun, and with it, the hunt. The morning sun stretched across the canyon walls, pulling long shadows that shifted with every gust of wind. The hunter stood tall at the edge of the hollow, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if he could already see the trail of those who had left the woman broken and buried beneath the bear. His chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm, but his mind was not calm. He felt the weight of something larger than himself, as though the earth had set him on a path that could not be turned back. Behind him, the fire still crackled low, warming the frail figure who had become his charge. She stirred again, her breath shallow, her body fighting to return from the edge of exhaustion. Her hair fell in tangles across her face, strands catching the light as she blinked at her surroundings. It was a world far from whatever life she had once known. Her eyes followed the hunter's movements, cautious at first, then softening as if she had begun to understand that his silence carried no threat. He returned to her side, pressing a cup of water into her hands. She sipped, her lips trembling against the wooden rim, then tried to speak. Her words were jagged and weak, broken by her accent and pain. Yet through them, pieces of her past emerged. She had come west with her family, chasing promises of land and freedom, whispered by men who drew maps and spoke of endless opportunity. The journey had been long, the land unforgiving, and danger always near. Then came the night of fire. Men rode from the darkness shouting, their rifles flashing against the flames. Her people scattered, but she was seized, dragged into the wilderness with screams fading behind her. She could remember the sharp cries of her kin, the smell of burning wood, the harsh laughter of strangers. After that, everything blurred. Pain, fear, then the towering shadow of the bear that had collapsed over her, both curse and shield. The hunter listened, his jaw clenched, his heart tightening with each word. He did not ask questions. Questions could wait. What mattered now was that she lived, and those who had harmed her still walked the earth. He placed more wood on the fire, his movements deliberate, his silence heavy with thought. To her, he must have seemed a man of few words. Yet in his stillness lay a storm gathering. As the day stretched on, he gathered herbs from the canyon edge, mixing them into a paste to press against the bruises along her arms. She flinched at first, then relaxed under his care. He had learned these remedies from his elders, who taught that the earth carried cures for every wound, if one knew where to look. She watched him work, her eyes searching his face as though trying to understand the man who had pulled her from death's grasp. In her gaze was gratitude but also fear, for she knew that her survival might draw more danger upon him. When the sun dipped toward the west, he prepared food, sharing dried meat and roasted roots with her. She ate slowly, every bite reminding her body that it was still alive. Between mouthfuls, she tried again to speak, to form words that carried both warning and plea. She spoke of the men who had taken her, describing the marks on their clothes, the cruel shine in their eyes. Though her language faltered, her meaning was clear. These were no simple wanderers. They were men who thrived on fear, who carved their path through fire and blood. The hunter's eyes narrowed. His people had seen the same kind of men before. Traders who came with iron and whiskey, soldiers who built forts on stolen land, bandits who roamed the plains, preying on the weak. Always the same hunger, always the same violence. To face them was to walk into danger, yet to let them live was to allow their shadow to spread. He looked to the fire, its flames twisting upward like spirits calling for vengeance, and knew the path before him was already chosen. That night, as the woman slept, he sat awake, sharpening his blade under the starlight. Each stroke of stone against steel echoed in the hollow, a quiet rhythm that matched the beat of his thoughts. He remembered the words of his grandfather, spoken long ago under the same sky. A man does not choose the battles the earth places in his path. He only chooses whether to walk with honor or turn away. With every pass of the blade, the hunter felt the weight of that teaching. The woman dreamed restlessly beside the fire. Her lips whispered broken cries, her hands clutching at the blanket as though she still ran from unseen riders. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm, grounding her to the present. She quieted, though her brow stayed furrowed with shadows of the past. Watching her, he realized that her survival was not only a matter of healing wounds. The scars within her would take longer to mend if they ever did. When dawn returned, the canyon awoke with the cry of hawks circling high above. The hunter rose early, moving silently along the river's edge to search for tracks. The earth told stories if one knew how to read it. He found faint imprints of hooves, a trail leading westward. The ground bore signs of many riders, heavy and careless, as if they believed no one dared follow. He traced the line with his fingers. Feeling the pull of destiny in the soil, he returned to the hollow, where she sat upright, her strength slowly returning. She looked at him with questioning eyes, sensing he had seen something. He did not speak of the tracks, not yet. Instead, he handed her more food, urging her to keep her strength. She obeyed, though her gaze lingered on him as if she could read the truth in his silence. As the hours passed, she began to share more of her story. Her family had carried little but hope when they traveled west. Her father believed the open plains would give them freedom, but the land had not welcomed them easily. Drought, sickness, and isolation had weighed heavy, yet still they endured. It was only when violence came that their resolve finally shattered. She spoke of her younger brother's laughter, her mother's voice singing at night, memories now stained by fire. Tears welled in her eyes, though she tried to hold them back. The hunter did not tell her his own stories, but they burned in his chest all the same. He thought of his people, driven from their hunting grounds, forced to watch as strangers cut the earth into lines and boundaries. He thought of battles fought to protect the land, of warriors who had fallen with the names of their ancestors on their lips. Her pain was not foreign to him. It was the same sorrow carried by his people, dressed in a different form. By the third day, her steps grew steadier. She could rise without faltering, though her body still bore the marks of suffering. He watched as she moved about the hollow, her eyes tracing the cliffs as though searching for meaning in the stone. She seemed both fragile and strong, a spirit unwilling to yield despite everything taken from her. Yet danger pressed closer. The hunter could feel it in the air, a tension that clung like smoke after fire. Ravens circled more often now, their cries sharp and insistent. Tracks along the river grew fresher, a sign that the riders had not passed long ago. He knew time was narrowing. Each day that passed brought the enemy nearer, though they did not yet know a hunter followed their trail. On the evening of the fourth day, he prepared the horses. The woman watched him with unease, sensing that the hollow would no longer shelter them. She asked, her voice trembling, if they were leaving. He nodded once, his expression solemn. Her fear rose, but she said nothing more, only gathered what little she had been given. As the fire burned low that night, she lay awake, staring at the stars. He sat nearby, silent, the weight of his decision heavy in the air. He would track those men. He would follow their trail into the unknown. But he also knew he carried more than his own life now. The woman's survival had become bound to his path, her fate tied to his every step. The canyon wind rose, carrying the distant sound of hoofbeats, faint but undeniable. She heard it too, her body tensing, her breath catching in her throat. He stood slowly, axe in hand, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sound drifted from. The firelight flickered against his face, hardening his features into the mask of a warrior. The night held its breath, and so did she, waiting for what would come. The trail had been set, the path unbroken. And somewhere in the darkness, the men who had left her beneath the bear drew closer with every beat of their horses' hooves. The night carried the sound of hoofbeats like a drum echoing against the canyon walls. They were distant, fading into the wind, yet enough to keep both the hunter and the woman awake by the low fire. She lay with her eyes wide open, staring at the flames as though they alone could hold the darkness back. He sat with his axe across his knees, sharpening the edge with steady strokes. Neither spoke. Words were not needed. The silence between them carried the weight of what was coming. When dawn finally broke, the light revealed the tension carved into their faces. She looked at him, her eyes asking what her voice could not. He stood, tightening the strap of his blade and nodding toward the horse. She understood. They could not wait here. The riders who haunted her dreams were not shadows of the past, but figures drawing nearer each day. She climbed carefully onto the horse, her body still weak, though her spirit showed a spark of strength. He mounted behind her, steadying her as the horse carried them forward into the vast sweep of the plains. The land stretched endlessly, painted with brush and stone, the air sharp with the scent of sage. As they rode, the hunter's eyes never rested. He studied the horizon, the tracks in the dirt, the paths of birds circling above. Every sign told a story, and those stories spoke of danger. The riders had passed not long before, their trail carved deep into the earth. He knew they moved with little care, believing no one would dare to follow. But he was Comanche, and his people had long been hunters of both beast and man. The woman clung to him, her heart pounding with each step of the horse. She could not keep her mind from returning to the night of fire. The screams, the flashes of rifles, the sound of her father's voice shouting her name before being swallowed by chaos. Every time she closed her eyes, the memories returned like ghosts. Yet when she looked at the man beside her, something in his steady presence anchored her. He did not speak much, but his silence was stronger than any promise. By midday, they came upon the remnants of a camp. Ashes still smoldered faintly in the pit, the smell of smoke clinging to the air. Scattered bones of a rabbit lay in the dirt, picked clean. He crouched, running his fingers through the ashes, feeling the warmth that told him the riders had been here no more than a night ago. She watched him, her throat tightening. It was proof that the men who had taken everything from her were real and close, their shadows still fresh upon the land. But something else caught the hunter's eye. Not all the tracks belonged to horses. There were boot prints, heavy and careless, pacing back and forth around the fire. He studied them, his mind forming the picture of men too sure of themselves, too certain that no one would strike back. That arrogance would be their weakness. Yet it also told him they were not hiding, and men who did not hide were men unafraid to bring death. They rode on, though slower now, careful not to reveal themselves too soon. She sensed his caution and asked with a weak voice what he saw. He only replied with a single word: wolves. She did not know if he spoke of the beasts that prowled the wild or the men they pursued. In truth, there was little difference. Both hunted the weak. Both thrived on fear. As night fell, they made camp near a narrow ravine where the river whispered over stone. The hunter gathered branches, but before lighting the fire, he paused, considering. Fire brought warmth and comfort, but it also drew eyes from miles away. He looked at her, weighing the risk. She gave a small nod, showing she understood even without words. They sat together in the darkness, the stars their only light. It was there she began to speak more of her past. She told him about the journey west, about the dreams her family carried. She spoke of her brother, who had carved toys from scraps of wood, of her mother, who sang old songs to keep their spirits alive. Each memory was a knife twisting in her chest, yet she let the words spill into the night. The hunter listened without interruption. He did not offer comfort, but his presence was a comfort itself. She felt less alone in her grief because he carried it with her in silence. While she spoke, he thought of his own people. He remembered nights when soldiers rode into their camps, torches blazing, rifles firing. He remembered carrying the wounded into the darkness, hearing the cries of children silenced by fear. Her pain was not separate from his. It was bound together by the same thread of loss. In her story, he heard echoes of his own. The following day, the hunter turned their path toward higher ground. From the ridge, he could see far into the plains. Dust rose faintly in the distance, the sure sign of riders. He pointed, and her breath caught in her throat. The men who haunted her dreams were not far. The hunter's eyes hardened. This was no longer just a pursuit. It was a crossing of paths that could not be avoided, but the story deepened with more than vengeance. Along their trail, signs of another presence appeared. Smaller tracks, lighter than the riders, moved parallel to their path. At first he thought it might be scouts sent ahead, but the spacing was different, careful and cautious. Whoever left those tracks was following too, though not part of the group they hunted. It was another shadow in the wilderness. The hunter did not yet know if it was friend or foe. That night, the tension thickened. The woman sensed it in his silence, in the way his hand never left the haft of his axe. She asked if danger was near, and he gave only a brief nod. She lay awake long after, her eyes fixed on the stars, wondering how many enemies the land could hide. In the darkness, the hunter thought of the choice before him. To follow the riders meant walking into fire, yet to turn away meant leaving her pain unavenged. The blood already spilled demanded an answer. He felt the pull of the spirits, as though the land itself had tied his fate to hers. By the fifth morning, the tracks of the riders grew sharper, fresher, their trail leading toward a rocky bluff where the earth rose in jagged lines. The hunter knew such ground well. It was a place men chose for shelter, but also for ambush. He studied the land, his eyes narrowing. The enemy was near, perhaps close enough to see them already. He guided the horse carefully, staying within the cover of stone. The woman gripped the saddle, her eyes darting with fear. She whispered a question, asking what they would do if the men found them. The hunter did not answer. His silence was not from uncertainty, but from a focus sharp as the edge of his blade. He could already see the path unfolding, though its end was hidden in shadow. As the sun set, they halted at the mouth of a narrow canyon. The hunter dismounted, running his hand along the earth. Here, the tracks split. Some of the riders had gone forward, others scattered into the rocks. He rose slowly, his jaw tightening. This was no simple trail. The enemy was spreading out, perhaps searching, perhaps preparing. Either way, the air itself felt heavy with the promise of blood. The woman looked at him, her voice trembling, as she said she feared the men would never stop. He met her gaze, his dark eyes steady. Then he spoke, his voice low, carrying the weight of truth. They will stop when the earth drinks their blood. She shivered, not only from fear, but from the certainty she heard in his words. That night, they did not light a fire. They sat in silence, listening to the distant echoes of movement within the canyon. Every crack of stone, every whisper of wind carried the shape of unseen danger. She leaned against him, her exhaustion heavy. And for the first time since he had found her, she allowed her body to rest fully against his. He remained still, his eyes fixed on the darkness, his hand never leaving the axe. The canyon held its secrets, and within it lay the men who had torn her life apart. But there were others too, shadows moving with unknown intent, watching from afar. The hunter knew the path ahead would test not only his strength, but hers as well. Vengeance was close, yet so was death. And as the stars wheeled above them, the land seemed to whisper that the true hunt had only just begun. The canyon walls loomed high, their jagged edges catching the faint light of the moon. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of stone dislodged by unseen movement. The hunter crouched low, his hand pressed against the earth, feeling for tremors that might betray the rider's position. The woman stayed close behind him, her breath uneven, her eyes wide with both fear and determination. She had grown quieter with each mile, no longer asking questions, no longer fighting her trembling. She understood now that they stood on the edge of something from which there would be no easy return. The tracks in the canyon floor told a story as clear as words carved into stone. Horses had passed through here recently. Their hooves struck deep, the ground still unsettled. The hunter read them as though the earth itself whispered. Some of the riders had split to the left, climbing into the rocks, while others pressed forward deeper into the gorge. It was a tactic he recognized spread thin enough to corner prey, but close enough to gather for the kill. He rose slowly, his eyes sweeping the ridges above. Shadows shifted where they should not, movements too deliberate to be mistaken for animals. The enemy was here, waiting. The woman sensed it too. Her hand tightened against the fabric of his shoulder. Her body stiffed with the knowledge that the men who had torn her life apart were near. She whispered his name once, soft, almost like a plea, but he raised a hand to silence her. Words were dangerous here. Every sound traveled far in the canyon's hollow heart. They moved slowly, step by step, hugging the stone walls. The moonlight painted silver edges along the rocks, casting deep pools of darkness where anything could hide. The hunter's every sense sharpened. He could hear the faint clink of metal against stone, the muffled murmur of voices carried on the wind. The riders were not far, but they were patient. Waiting for their chance to strike, they stopped at a bend where the canyon narrowed, and there he saw harshest from a small fire. Carefully smothered, the faint smell of smoke lingering. He crouched to study it, his fingers brushing the cooling embers. The fire had been tended with care, not like the careless blaze of drunken men. This was something else. Someone had been here. Someone who knew how to move unseen. He glanced up at the ridges again, his instincts bristling. There was another presence in these stones. A watcher who did not belong to either him or the riders. The woman's eyes followed his. She whispered a question he did not answer. His silence was heavy with meaning, and she felt her heart tighten. It was not enough to face the riders. There was another shadow in this hunt. Its purpose was not yet clear. As the night deepened, they pressed further into the canyon. The walls rose higher, shutting out the stars, pressing the air into a stillness that felt suffocating. The hunter's grip on his axe never loosened. His people had always known that the land spoke before danger struck, and now it was speaking in the stillness, in the way the birds had fallen silent, in the way the wind itself seemed to hold its breath. At last they came upon the riders' camp. Hidden in a hollow between stones, the firelight flickered faint and low, throwing twisted shadows across the ground. Figures moved around it, their voices low, their laughter carrying the sharp edge of cruelty. The woman froze when she saw them, her breath catching as recognition seared through her. These were the men. Their faces, half lit by the fire, were the same that had ridden through her family's camp with flames in their eyes. She gripped the hunter's arm, her nails biting into his skin, and he did not move. He let her hold on to him, her body trembling with memories too raw to contain. The hunter studied the camp carefully. There were more men than he expected, 7, maybe 8. They lounged around the fire, rifles resting within reach, their horses tied nearby. Their confidence was plain. They believed themselves untouchable, masters of this stretch of land. But their arrogance blinded them to the shadows that crept closer. Still, the hunter knew better than to strike now. To charge into their midst would be to invite death, not only for him, but for the woman who relied on his protection. He pulled her gently back into the shadows, guiding her behind a cluster of rocks where they could watch unseen. Her breathing was ragged, her eyes locked on the fire as though she could not look away from the faces of her tormentors. Time passed slowly in that hidden perch. The riders drank, their voices rising with the firelight. They spoke of raids, of spoils taken, of families scattered like leaves in the wind. Their laughter cut through the night like blades. The woman pressed her face into her hands, but the hunter kept his gaze fixed. his jaw tight, his silence carved from stone. He was waiting for the right moment, waiting for the weakness that always revealed itself when men grew too sure of their strength. Then came a sound that did not belong. A scrape of stone above, faint but sharp in the stillness. The riders fell silent, their laughter breaking off as heads turned toward the cliffs. One of them rose, rifle in hand, peering into the shadows. The hunter's heart quickened. The other presence was near, closer than he had feared. Whoever had been trailing them now stood above the riders' camp. Unseen but not unheard. The men cursed softly, their voices low with suspicion. They spread out, rifles ready, scanning the ridges. The fire crackled louder in the sudden silence, each pop of sap like a gunshot. The woman clutched the hunter's arm again, her eyes wide with fear, but he did not move. He watched, his thoughts racing. Was this unseen figure an enemy of the riders, or a threat to them all? Minutes passed, stretched taut like a bowstring. Then a stone tumbled from above, clattering against the canyon floor. The riders shouted, rifles snapping up, but the cliffs gave back only silence. The unseen watcher had vanished as swiftly as they had appeared. The men cursed again, laughing nervously, trying to shake off their unease. But the hunter knew better. The land did not make mistakes. There was someone else here, moving with purpose, waiting for their moment. The tension grew unbearable. The woman leaned closer, her whisper almost broken. "Who is it?" The hunter's reply was low, a whisper carried only for her. "Another wolf?" She shivered at the words, the meaning sinking deep. Not only the riders hunted these canyons, there was a third path crossing theirs, a shadow whose loyalties were unknown. Through the long hours of night, the hunter and the woman remained in their hiding place. Watching the fire burn low, listening to the restless movements of the riders, sleep was impossible. Every crack of stone, every gust of wind carried weight. She leaned against him, her exhaustion heavy, yet fear kept her eyes open. He stayed still, his body taut with readiness. Every sense honed to the edge. When dawn's first light touched the canyon, the riders stirred, saddling their horses and gathering their weapons. They spoke of moving north, of another raid of villages left unguarded. The woman's heart clenched as she listened, her fists trembling with rage and grief. The hunter's eyes narrowed, his resolve sharpening with each word. He knew now that this was no small band of raiders. Their violence stretched further, their shadow darker. To strike them was not only vengeance, but necessity. Yet even as the riders prepared to move, he felt the weight of the other presence still lingering. The watcher and the cliffs had not shown themselves again, but their absence spoke louder than their appearance. They were waiting, perhaps for the same moment he sought. The hunter's jaw tightened. The canyon had become a stage set for blood, and every player waited in silence for the first strike to fall. The woman clutched his arm once more, her voice breaking as she whispered, "When will it end?" His answer was as steady as the stone beneath them. "When the earth remembers their names." She closed her eyes, the words sinking deep, both terrifying and comforting. The riders mounted their horses, their laughter ringing false in the morning air. The fire died behind them, leaving only smoke curling toward the sky. The hunter rose from the shadows, his hand tight around the axe, his body coiled like a predator ready to spring. The woman followed, her heart hammering as the distance between hunter and prey narrowed with every step. The canyon held its breath. The riders, the unseen watcher, the hunter, and the woman, all threads pulling tighter, weaving into the moment that would decide everything. The trail ahead was short now, leading straight into the storm that waited. The canyon floor was quiet, but the silence was no longer empty. It was heavy, thick with the weight of what was about to unfold. The hunter rose from the rocks, his figure carved against the pale morning light, his axe in hand. The woman stood close behind him, her body trembling though she tried to steady herself. Ahead, the riders moved, their laughter carrying like brittle glass, unaware that shadows stalked their every step. And above, high on the ridges, the unseen watcher remained hidden, waiting for the same moment, the same spark, that would set everything ablaze. The hunter stepped forward, every movement deliberate, like a wolf closing the gap on prey. His breath came steady, his eyes never leaving the riders. They were too many, but he had long ago learned that numbers did not decide battles. What mattered was patience, precision, and the courage to strike when the land itself called for blood. The woman reached for him, her hand catching his arm. She whispered with fear and pleading, begging him not to walk into their fire alone. He turned to her, his eyes steady, his voice low, carrying the weight of truth. "You carry their scars. I carry their end." She shook her head, tears filling her eyes, but she knew there was no turning him. The path was already chosen. The riders halted suddenly, their horses snorting, ears pricked toward the cliffs. They sensed it too, the invisible tension hanging over them. One of them cursed, pointing toward the ridge where stones shifted faintly. Rifles swung upward, the laughter gone, replaced with sharp commands. The watcher above revealed themselves not with words, but with the snap of an arrow cutting the air. It struck the ground near the riders, and in that heartbeat of confusion, the hunter moved. He was a blur across the canyon floor, axe flashing in the light, his voice breaking the silence with a cry that carried the power of his ancestors. The horses screamed, the riders shouted, rifles firing wild into stone and dust. The woman pressed herself against the rock, her heart hammering, her eyes fixed on the storm unfolding. The hunter struck first, his axe bearing into the nearest rider before the man could raise his weapon. Another swung his rifle, but the hunter was already upon him, dragging him from the saddle into the dust. The clash erupted like thunder, chaos filling every corner of the canyon. The watcher above loosed another arrow, then another, striking to riders from the shadows. The hunters had become the hunted. The woman forced herself to rise, searching for cover, searching for anything she could use. Her body shook, but in her heart burned the memory of fire, of her family's screams. She would not stand frozen while the man who had saved her risked everything. Her hand found a fallen rifle on the ground, heavy and unfamiliar. But she clutched it as if it were the last piece of strength she could summon. The fight raged. The hunter moved with a rhythm born of years hunting across plains and canyons, his axe singing against flesh and bone, his body never still. But the riders were fierce, their numbers pressing, their rifles flashing with deadly intent. The watchers' arrows rained down, thinning their ranks. But still, they fought with the desperation of cornered wolves. The woman's cry broke through the chaos as one rider charged toward the hunter with his rifle raised. She lifted the weapon in her hands, steadying it with all the strength she could gather, and fired. The sound cracked through the canyon, echoing like thunder, and the rider fell before reaching his mark. Her hand shook violently, her breath ragged. But she had changed the course of the battle. The hunter glanced back, his eyes meeting hers for a heartbeat. Pride flickered there, brief but fierce, before he turned again to the fight. One by one, the riders fell, their arrogance stripped away by steel, arrow, and fire. Dust choked the air, blood stained the ground, and at last the canyon fell silent once more. The woman stood frozen, the rifle slipping from her hands. Her body trembled as though it could no longer hold her upright. The hunter approached, his chest heaving, his axe streaked with crimson. He reached out, steadying her as she collapsed into his arms. Her tears came then, pouring freely, not only from fear, but from release. The men who had haunted her dreams now lay broken in the dust. The watcher appeared at last, descending from the cliffs with the grace of one who belonged to the stone itself, a figure wrapped in leather and shadows, their bow still in hand. The hunter met their gaze. No words exchanged, only understanding. This had been more than vengeance. It had been justice, drawn together by unseen threads of fate. The watcher gave a single nod before vanishing back into the wilderness, their presence as fleeting as the wind. When the sun rose higher, the canyon floor was littered with silence. The hunter and the woman stood among the fallen, the weight of what had passed pressing heavily on them both. She looked at him, her eyes filled with questions, with gratitude, with grief too vast for words. He only held her gaze, his silence carrying more meaning than speech could hold. They buried the bodies far from the river, leaving no mark for scavengers or spirits to follow. The work was hard, the sun merciless, but neither complained. When it was done, they stood together at the edge of the canyon, staring into the horizon where the plains stretched without end. For the first time, she felt the world might hold something other than fear. The hunter guided her back to the horse, his movements slower now, the weight of battle settling into his bones. She mounted carefully, her body sore, but her spirit steadier than before. When he joined her, the two rode from the canyon, leaving behind the shadows that had nearly consumed them. The days that followed were quiet. They traveled across the plains, through valleys where wildflowers bloomed, and rivers cut silver paths through the land. The woman spoke more freely now, sharing memories not only of loss, but of hope, of her family's dreams, of the songs her mother once sang. The hunter listened, his silence not empty, but full, as though each word she spoke became part of the land itself. She asked him once why he had saved her. His answer came slowly, his voice low and steady. "The earth placed you in my path. To turn away would be to turn from myself." She held on to those words, finding comfort in their truth. As the seasons shifted, they found a place where the land offered shelter, where the river bent and trees gave shade. Here they rested, building a life not free of scars, but bound by survival. The woman healed not only in body, but in spirit, though the past never vanished. The hunter stayed at her side, a guardian, a companion, a reminder that even in the harshest wilderness, there could be mercy in time. The story of the bear, the canyon, and the vengeance taken would become one of those tales carried by wind and fire, spoken in camps beneath the stars. A tale of a Comanche hunter who found a woman beneath the weight of death, gave her shelter, and avenged her pain with blood. A tale that spoke not only of loss, but of resilience. Of bonds forged in the darkest moments, the woman often stood at the river's edge, staring at her reflection in the water, feeling the weight of all that had passed. She did not forget her family, nor the fire that had consumed them, but she carried them with her in every step forward. The hunter, standing beside her, said little, but his presence was enough. Together, they had faced wolves in the canyon, shadows in the night, and together they had endured. The land itself seemed to remember. The wind whispering through the grass, the ravens circling high, the earth holding the blood of the fallen deep within its soil. Yet for them, the story was not only about vengeance, it was about survival, about finding light in the midst of darkness, about choosing to walk forward even when the past tried to drag them back. And so, their journey became more than a tale of hunters and raiders. It became a story of healing, of endurance, and of the bond between two souls thrown together by fate. In the endless sweep of the plains beneath the vast sky, they walked into a future not promised, but earned. And the echoes of their struggle remained in the land, a reminder that even in the harshest wilderness, there's a place for hope. Top of form, bottom of form.